All right, good evening. We'll go ahead and get started. So we'll start by setting our motivation. So we try to create a very broad altruistic intention to use our time to understand more clearly the wisdom of the Buddha, the methods that we can put into place to achieve the same realizations that the Buddha achieved that resulted in his enlightenment and reliably results in the enlightenment of anyone who replicates those realizations, those insights, those inner transformations. We think that we want to engage in that not only for our own benefit, but mainly to be of benefit, to gain the skills, the ability to work for sentient beings perfectly. So we try to develop those minds of confidence, refuge, and bodhicitta. All right. Does anyone have a question from last week or something that's come up upon further reflection of anything that was introduced?
I use this as an opportunity to read some of the other books.
Sorry, I can barely hear.
I use this as an opportunity to read some of the material on it, and I'm really enjoying that the heart of the path. I really am enjoying that today, especially. That's my comment.
Yeah, for a single, as we've said, for a single commentary, on the topic, it's probably the best one. Anything else? Nope. Okay. So we'll continue. We'll continue with looking at day 15. The quote is, "Having wholehearted devotion enables us to conquer all our enemies." So then he gives, that's a quote by Lama Zopa, and then within the commentary on that quote, there are, because all our enemies is a pretty broad category. And so there's a number of different parts to that that are reflected upon. So the word Mara is introduced maybe for the first time in Lamrim Year here, and it's a word that you find in the sutras, really kind of all over the place in the sutras. Um, it and it has, I can't speak to all of the different correct levels of meaning, that are there. What's meant um, in all of the different ways of understanding it. In the sutras, it is, just a reading of the sutras one way seems to be as though Mara is the personification of kind of a troublemaker, a trickster, kind of a deceiver, someone who seems to enjoy um, taking, taking people off the spiritual path, kind of messing with people's practice, causing them to doubt things, questioning. So, just a plain reading of the sutras could lend itself to the idea, and I can't, like I said, I can't argue for or against the idea that there could be, and certainly I think Buddhism, separately from this kind of historical use of the word Mara, Buddhism accepts the idea that you find beings in other realms who live for extremely long, compared to the human lifespan, who live for extremely long periods of time, and who, for one reason or another, have kind of generally ill will toward some, the interfering spirits, or, you know, the idea of spirit harm. So I can't, I certainly can't say that in the sutras, it coming up again and again and again doesn't have something to do with that kind of understanding. It could also, sometimes, it could be a literary device. I can't say that it's not. I can't say that it's not a way of being introduced to kind of the voice of self-cherishing, or the voice of ego grasping, like what the counterpoint, the kind of inner egoistic hesitancy, or objections that we raise in kind of internally when we recognize the difficulty of selflessness and altruism, and all of the things that we're encouraged to do, how we are. So, and they do talk about outer, and even in the commentary, there's this idea of outer maras and inner maras. So are there some, and here, so Mara, he also talks about, we don't have to think about it only in the context of like a being devoted, kind of single-pointedly to troublemaking, or the terms of what could constitute an outer Mara. Could be, there could be such things, beings that are causing spirit harm and so on. I don't have I can't say one way or the other. But Lama Zopa here in the commentary also talks about people, in our lives who might play a role, sometimes that serves or could serve to diminish our dedication and our interest in pursuing spiritual, because they themselves might not see the value of it. They might recommend a different path. So there's a kind of courageousness that is required when people around us may not share, and that, that isn't to say that they may be on the right path for them, but they might be so excited. And we could do the same thing. We might, people who are on a path and they feel like it's working for them, they get excited about it, just like we get excited about our path. And it's okay to share, oh, I read this, or I attended this and I found it, helpful. But Buddhism certainly avoids proselytizing, trying to convert people. But that's not true of all traditions globally. Some people feel an obligation to kind of do that. And so that might be something that we have to find a way to work with, if we're exposed to that kind of, and of course, it could also just be people who don't understand not drinking, or not, not wanting to put ourselves in certain situations where the certain kinds of activities are going on, and they, because they don't share that view, and so they might diminish, or they might demean, or so that's one way of, that's something that of course happens. People in our orbit might pull us in certain directions, and we need to cultivate a certain courage to remain on what we have identified is right for us. And what Lama Zopa here is saying, in part, is that strong guru devotion, strong, properly relying on the spiritual guide, is one of the ways in which we can develop that inner strength. It's one of the supports that we have to rely on, to turn toward when we're facing any of these sorts of conditions, because we're asking for advice, we're asking for clarifications, we're asking for practices. So we're kind of, because he says, coming under the control of the virtuous friends is part of that process. So recognizing that person can guide us, can demonstrate, what kinds of practices are best for us, then we can have great confidence that we know what to do. We know, we've been given the blueprint, and we've been told, this is what you need to do, and so that it can be a real comfort. We're not, because it's so, almost everyone has the experience of all of the different tools and techniques being really overwhelming, all of the different practices, all of the different, but when you can get advice, and when you can kind of create a more manageable roadmap, for yourself, for like what your daily practice looks like, then you can fall back on that and just think, I'm fulfilling my guru's advice. My guru is leading me to enlightenment. And then we'll be protected from those sorts of interferences. And then there's another sort of karmic, where Lama Zopa is saying that we, by then following through on that, we develop a momentum, like Justin was talking about merit at one point, and talking about how that's kind of like spiritual momentum, kind of like, I did this yesterday, I'm doing this today, I'm going to do this tomorrow, I did this last week. We're building these habits, these tendencies, and it's kind of like inertia. It's kind of like, we're just under the force of consistency. We just start to build up these beneficial, supportive habits, they become sort of second nature. It's not, it's like assuming that, we're not addicted to, any serious substances, any, really, really intense things. We don't have to wake up, every day and actively think about, not doing cocaine. We just don't, because but we have thought about it. Like, we grew up thinking, like, our parents told us and we saw, but if we didn't know anything, if we had no knowledge, then we might try it. If someone just said, oh, hey, try this, this is what it's called. And, and we had no baseline, we might be like, sure. But we do have that. We've seen it in movies and it's in the news, and we're so deeply familiar with the disadvantages of that. It's not something we think about. We just, every single day, we have to think about this kind of unhealthy food or that kind of unhealthy food, or, there are things we do struggle with, but the really intense things that are easier, those are just, we've internalized that. So that's kind of like merit, in a way that we have, with respect to that, we have good merit. Like, we've so deeply internalized it. It's not a question. And so all of these practices, that if we actually are doing them and we're building those habits, then that momentum also protects us, because we're internalizing that wisdom, and through that, purifying a lot of past negativity. There's many different ways because in a way, it's kind of like, that is the opponent power. That is, there's formal purification practice, but every time we engage in virtue, we're deepening a habit that counteracts a negative habit. The more we're deeply familiar with love, the easier love is to just fall into as the default. The more that we're familiar with compassion, the easier it's going to be for that to be the default state. And so that is purifying our past familiarity with ill will, with maliciousness, with self-centeredness. So there's different, it doesn't have to be like actual formal purification practice is indispensable. It has its own indispensable role. But all of these constructive habits, they're also purifying the mind. And Lama Zopa is kind of saying that by doing that, we kind of don't, it becomes harder and harder for the negative karmas that are in the mind to meet with circumstances that can activate them, which would result in being capable of being messed with, being, these interfering forces, these, it's an interdependent kind of a thing. If there is an interfering force, it can't affect us unless there's a negative karma in our mind that's able to be ripened by meeting with that circumstance. But the more we shield the mind with virtue and positivity and this momentum, the spiritual momentum, the harder and harder it is for those, we can't say that we're completely free of all negativity, but we're kind of layering on top all of this virtue, and that's what's kind of active. That's the karma that's kind of really active in the mind. The negative karmas, they're kind of laying dormant because they were created a long time ago, but now we're kind of consistently on this path of virtue, and that's the kind of highway in the mind that's the deepest and the strongest and the most active. So it's kind of shielding what could otherwise be kind of making ourselves a target for these interfering forces. If there's so much negativity in the mind, then much easier to have that become activated. So that's another way that we're protected, by coming under the Guru's advice, by following the Guru's advice, by creating all of these habits day by day by day, even when we meet with circumstances that could otherwise be an interfering force. Our own mind just isn't susceptible to that because there's so much active positivity in the mind. And then, of course, the inner Mara is the delusions, the afflictions that we do still struggle with, because even though we've found a guide and devoted to the guide, of course, there's still a lot of probably, we're still deeply familiar, even though we're doing our best and we're making progress and it's going in the right direction. Still, we have to contend with the negativity that is there, the habits, the tendencies that are not constructive, that are still part of our mind. But and so that's the Lama Zopa, or Lama Yeshe calls that the inner enemy, the inner Mara. But the only way to overcome the inner Mara is just to continue to go in the right direction, to continue doing what we're doing with everything that's being, that we're discussing. So ultimately, by following in that, eventually we'll slowly, just like with the outer example of really intense, harmful things like cocaine, that we've overcome already, hopefully. But there's still, I think about, this food and that. So there's subtler things, and in the same way, the mind, the afflictions are the same way. We will get to a point where the idea of killing a human being, for example, is something that we wouldn't ever consider, no matter what circumstances, no matter how justified we are in that decision because of their threatening to our life. We'll get to a, as a spiritual practitioner, we can get to a point where we would rather give up this life rather than incur that negativity, and we would happily do that. But once we get to that point, still, we'll get, angry at sentient beings. We haven't given up anger completely, even though, so they kind of describe it in the same way, where the things that are, and even with killing, like we would first get to a point where we would never kill, because many people would kill, many people do kill in defense of like their country or in defense of some idea, or out of just a rage, kind of just a blind homicidal rage that can overtake a person. So the not killing in terms of self-preservation with respect to even just killing, that's of course even more subtle than the not killing out of a blind rage or being willing to kill on behalf of an ideology or a government or something. So that's actually, of course, what would happen first, is we would give up that kind of the ways of killing in terms of that aren't to protect one's own life. That would probably come last, because that self-preservation instinct is quite strong. So all of the afflictions are kind of like that, in the sense that they have coarse aspects, and then they have subtler and subtler aspects. And the subtler aspects are always more difficult to overcome than the really coarse, really gross aspects. Like, we might not lie. We might be able to stop lying to, in a malicious kind of wounding way, but we might lie to protect people's opinion of ourselves. We might lie to mislead people about a fault that we have. That's subtler, that's more difficult. It's easier to be able to say, I'm not going to, say things that aren't true simply to cause harm to other people. But it's harder to say, I'm not going to try to manipulate people's opinion of me to protect my own sense of self-worth. And, so I'm like, yeah, people ask, oh, did you meditate, last week? And you're like, yeah, I definitely, when you didn't. And, so, because we want to be seen, as in a particular way. And so it's kind of like that, where these inner afflictions are going to follow a similar trajectory, where it isn't that like we flip a switch and it kind of, once we get to the point where we've realized emptiness directly, then whatever's remaining is just completely obliterated all at once, except for it has to be repeated to get rid of like the really, really subtle self-grasping. But in terms of hatred and, there's just no more of that once you realize emptiness directly. But prior to that, when we're just kind of applying antidotes and thinking about love and compassion, and those have a certain impact on the mind, where where they purify delusions from a coarse to a subtle kind of state. And that's ultimately, they point out that not much we can do about the existence of external maras, but the inner maras, that is our business. That is like our direct, what we can directly control. So they're more important, than the fact that there are external maras. The inner maras are actually more relevant. Any thoughts or questions?
Hi, Venerable. It's Cameron here. Thank you. It seems that that the inner maras, the subtle maras, indeed become more and more subtle over time, and the recognition of them, it's not so much that it becomes more difficult, it's just, I think you have to continue to be more in tune with what's going on in your mind. And it reminds me of something a teacher said many years ago, when not so much confronted, but when in a conversation with someone who is challenging your the tenets of Buddhism or your own beliefs or statements, that to look deeply within yourself and realize that any kind of defensive attitude you may have is simply self-grasping. And I mean, that can be said for just about anything that makes you feel defensive. But in particular about Buddhism, I thought it was a very interesting insight into how we hold on to so many things, including how we feel about Buddhism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder too sometimes if there isn't like an element of fear or doubt in there, like wondering, like I wonder if I'm wrong, you know, like because we don't know. I mean, we don't know for sure. I mean, maybe you know for sure, but I mean, I don't have any direct revelatory, experiences on my own. But they talk about, people in other, that do, they seem to also have, so this idea of confidence, this idea of faith that we develop, it really only becomes unshakable at a very, very advanced level, because we're just kind of, we're trying to confirm as much as we can based on our own direct experience. But we don't really know. And so like, it's a really dramatic thing to be wrong about. If, if it's true that like when we die, we might go to hell because we're not, so we're all just kind of like doing. So when people say that kind of thing, maybe subconsciously, I just kind of wonder if it's like, if there isn't some concern about that too, like not like in not that's unique to you. I just mean like in terms of all people, that we might grasp at it because we've kind of staked it out, and we're like, it's frightening, to like there's sort of a groundlessness, if we might be we might have made a mistake or something like that. That kind of stirs up a lot in the mind. But yeah, there's a story about some sort of Zen priest, I think, or someone. There was, I think it was right around the time of when there was some like Bible burnings that were happening, maybe in the Middle East. There's unrest, and people were being interviewed about different faiths, and or someone, it might have been a specific incident where somebody ripped up a Bible and like flushed it down the toilet or something. They did some, offensive thing. And some practitioner was asked like, well, how would you react to that? And he was like, well, I would call the plumber, because, the toilet is stopped up. So, he was obviously someone who was able to transcend that kind of idea that a practitioner can be harmed by the kind of outwardly rude or offensive or disrespectful things that a person does to try to get a reaction, from people of that. I thought that was interesting because of how many times people have been willing to kill because of that kind of insult, because of, and yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah. I've had some pretty amazing experiences as a long-time meditator. And once I was possessed by something, and it was when I was in Japan and I was going through what we call in Zen a great doubt. I was doubting if there was good and evil and all of these types of doubts, really working on the doubts. And then I heard the pound, pound, pound coming up the steps, and it scratched the top of my head and came down into my body and stayed there for a couple of years till I went to a different country. I was in India, and the first time I was there twice, but was in India and in a very amazing ashram where there was so much love and so much clarity and so much positive energy that I fainted and this thing came out of me. And since then, it was like, oh, so those are real. There are inner and outer beings, whatever you want to call them, devas or whatever, sprites or whoever. And it just gave me so much clarity and conviction to choose the light and love. There is no more doubt. There is absolutely no doubt. So it was intense and very scary, but I survived it so far, and it's been a real teaching for me. So,
yeah, I mean, they're certainly understood to be a real phenomenon in Tibetan Buddhism, and it could be even that like other traditions are, like exorcisms and things. I wonder if that it's not also being noticed by other kinds of traditions, the same kind of thing. But yeah, it's certainly presented as a factual sort of possibility. Okay. So then day 16 is kind of essentially saying very, very similar thing, where when we correctly devote ourselves to the Guru, we cannot be led in the wrong way. So essentially saying that through following the Guru, we will come to see what ought to be practiced, what ought to be discarded, because we are also observing their pure behavior, their devotion, their practice, and we want to, kind of gravitate toward that direction. We'll become like them. They say that we need to choose our teachers carefully because we will become like them over time. And if our teachers are doing what for us seems like demonstrating improper behavior, then we'll also emulate improper behavior. But if our teachers are demonstrating stainless morality and ethics, and then that's, eventually then we will internalize that just by being around them and just by seeing how they, the kind of words that they choose, the decisions that they make, how they cope with things.
Venerable.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. Say if you had like a teacher, say who was difficult from your view, from your side, how do you know, it's not for your benefit, for not behaving that way for your ultimate benefit, and you just think, the behavior is atrocious, so I need to move away? Is it more to listen to yourself and maybe not talk or think negatively about the teacher, but maybe think I'm not ready to cope with that behavior yet, rather than.
Yeah, I mean, if you've already, if you have had a time, or are still thinking of them in that way, rather than just like, oh, that is a person who is in the world, who is someone's teacher, or, if you, because we're free to um, look at the world and observe that there's a person who we don't know, haven't spoken to, but they have a role, they're well known perhaps, or they, and we can be like, oh, I don't want to associate with that. I don't, that's, we're totally, once we have kind of decided that we did make a relationship with them, and there was a time when they played that role, then if we come to decide that we are not able to get anything of further benefit out of it, then yeah, we just sort of hold a sense of respect for whatever it is that we received that was of some benefit. Maybe even, just that it was like that we didn't know that Buddhism was a thing, and because
Yeah,
now we do. Maybe that's as far as it goes, or maybe we can identify this or that, other than these other problematic things, and then we just think, at that time there was benefit in this way and that way. And so I'm grateful that I was able to be benefited like that. And now I'm looking for a different kind of person who is going to emulate these particular qualities that I'm looking for. And so I'm just going to move on and try to find something different.
yeah. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, because I'm. Yeah. Thank you very much.
So then day 17 is kind of also going back to a bit what we covered last time on Monday. We talked a bit about this, but it looks at it in maybe a slightly different way, where we were talking about, I think it was the first quote that we talked about on Monday, where it said that how successful we are in Guru devotion will determine our overall kind of spiritual trajectory. Day 17's quote, the skillful way to meditate on the Lamrim and complete the Lamrim realizations is to realize Guru devotion or proper reliance. So that kind of gets at a question that the gentleman who was, you guys were here having trouble hearing the questions. But, he said that he thought that it would be more so how successful we are in the actual topics, because there's a topic on karma, there's a topic on precious human rebirth, a topic on renunciation. So like our ability to just understand philosophically that topic, understand what's being presented, connect with it, internalize it, kind of in a more independent kind of way. And what Lama Zopa here is saying is, with respect to that, with respect to our ability to be successful in these other Lamrim meditations, karma, renunciation, precious human rebirth, impermanence, death, the way that we're relating to the spiritual guide is the most determinative factor. He says, when we follow the virtuous friend correctly, even if we don't meditate much, realizations will be generated spontaneously and effortlessly. The quickest way to achieve realizations is to do what most pleases the holy mind of the virtuous friend, which means following their advice. So, if we can say that we are living a life that is in accordance with our guru's wishes, then what Lama Zopa is saying, in part, is that that is what creates the internal conditions to realize any of these topics. He says, our answer to how do I achieve realizations is not normally this basic one, but that we need to do more retreat or some other practice. We don't know or we forget that it is guru devotion practice that made it possible for the past and present practitioners to achieve realizations quickly. We think some other practice will enable us to achieve realizations quickly, but it doesn't work. He says, when the water of devotion to the Guru has dried up, our mind is like a rock. Our meditation doesn't touch our heart and isn't really effective for our mind. At other times, when we have more devotion and really feel the kindness of the Guru from our heart, any meditation we try is very effective and very powerful. So, and again, here it doesn't necessarily mean that the Guru is someone that we're in communication with on a regular basis or that we know personally. Again, it could be taking His Holiness as the Guru. But when we think, how extraordinary it is that His Holiness is in the world and how incredible it is that He's devoted every moment of His life to teaching and traveling and giving the Dharma to people, leading countless sentient beings to enlightenment. And we think of our lives as being in service to what He's saying we ought to be practicing, we ought to be discarding. And we visualize Him, maybe at the beginning of each meditation above the crown of our head, and then we bring that down into the heart, and we think that our meditation on karma, our meditation on whatever it is in order to fulfill the holy wishes of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or whomever a person is regarding in that way, then the mind is just so much more expansive and open, and it's the insights are not dry kind of academic things. They become so much more personal and felt, and that without that, if we're just going to the library and we think of it as like just a separate body of knowledge, and it is just kind of this list of this, the list of 4, the list of 8, the list of, and I'm just memorizing. That's what I take that to be kind of what Lama Zopa is saying about the mind just kind of being like a rock. It's kind of like how we might approach studying for an exam, or in a way it's kind of like a relationship almost with a parent, not in terms of like there's dysfunctional ways of relating to the Guru too, but I mean wanting to have our parents think that we're doing, that we're doing well, that we're doing the right thing, that lends a certain power, to that. We care about their opinion. We're trying to act in the ways that they brought us up to act, what would make them proud. We shouldn't, it's important to say we don't want to replace a parent with a teacher. Like there's a transference kind of a thing that can happen that's not healthy. Where we kind of use the guru to heal traumas with parents and things. That's something to kind of be aware of. But I just mean that there's a certain power behind that kind of way of thinking that's more personal and more impactful. Any thoughts or questions? Yep.
Thank you. That was quite a new way of thinking about. Oh, sorry. It was quite a new way of thinking about how, having dependence on the guru and helping you generate realizations. I was thinking more along the lines of there was some kind of energy transference as well as, the belief and the experience and witnessing, your guru behaving in certain ways and expressing, certain virtues, etc. So is there something about an energy transference between a guru and a student that helps realizations also?
I think that maybe in terms of Adriana, there's probably something there. But I think ultimately, if there is something, it isn't mystical in the, it's the fact that we are receptive. We create receptivity through guru devotion. And so like when they say the blessings of the guru and that kind of thing, it's our own devotion, it's our own respect and seeing the guru's Buddha, and that opens our mind to being led, to being advised, to being guided in a way that wouldn't otherwise be as powerful. So certainly, our mind is energy, their mind is energy, the mind of enlightened, all of the enlightened beings is energy. And through the power of prayer, through the power of pledges that were made, we benefit in ways that activation of positive karma can happen, and so that there's certainly things like that are true. And I think with initiations and things, there's a particular role in Vajrayana where there's where that kind of thing in that way is also maybe more true or more emphasized. But that also still comes from our, because a person can be in that room and not be doing the visualizations not really seeing the guru as, because with Vajrayana, you're actually seeing them as an emanation, like in the form of that deity. So still, it's coming from our side. It's not like they can just magically lead all sentient beings, regardless of what that sentient being is, what's going on in their mind. We have to bring so much of that we've done through the work that we've just done on our own mind. It's an interdependent kind of a thing. It's like they say that the sun of all of the Buddhas does equally shine on all sentient beings. But if you go into your house and you draw all of the shades and you hide under the bed, doesn't matter. It's irrelevant that the sun is shining, because you haven't done any. You've got to go outside. You have to do what's necessary for that. They're doing everything that they can do, but we have to do what we need to do in order for that to actually penetrate and actually have some effect.
Just to comment, that's quite empowering, really. Self-empowering. To think, it's not just the guru giving you something. I didn't think of it as literal as that, but it's feels quite empowering. Thank you.
All right, we are just about out of time. Any final thoughts or questions?
Venerable, I'm just reading what Danny has put in the text here, in the messages here, about Guru Rinpoche, Dolji Kyatsu Rinpoche, smelling a flower. And is there a story about a certain teacher who made a demonstration of smelling a flower and then he became enlightened? Or
when there's a sutra where it might have just been one disciple, I'm not sure. There was the Buddha held a flower, and a student. You find that in the sutras. The people were just left and right, getting arhatship, and just by hearing one word of so that's sort of the power of Buddha. That as a wheel turning, but that the people, but again, it's a dependent arising. Why were those people the ones who were born as his disciples? It's because they had created a relationship in past lives, over maybe hundreds or thousands of past lives, where that karmic connection was established. And so they were ready at that. Their minds were so primed by all of that past relationship that they're just, in the sutras left and right, people are, getting enlightened through very, very simple, a mudra or a word here and there. You find that all throughout the sutras. But again, not only from the side of the Buddha, but because, those people were not randomly born into that situation. That situation didn't come about. They did the work to be the ones who, that's why in the Guru Puja it says, "May I be, among your very first circle of disciples. When you achieve enlightenment or when you manifest enlightenment, may I be among your very first circle of disciples." So that not that your guru isn't enlightened, but whenever, every time that your guru manifests in enlightened form, may you be present, may you be in that inner circle of disciples, because we might have a relationship with an enlightened being, but it might be a little bit more distant. It might be, like we might know Lama Zopa Rinpoche, but we're not in his very innermost circle of disciples. That's where you kind of want to be, So the prayer in the Guru Puja is, wherever you manifest enlightenment, may I be in your innermost circle of disciples. To kind of, because by reciting that prayer, we're helping to create the conditions for that to be true, karmically speaking. Okay. Well, we will meet again on Monday and carry on.
So we'll have Christmas, won't we, between here and Monday? Yeah.